You know, it wouldn't hurt you to help out for once, my mother said, her voice crisp as she reached for the sweet potatoes. Megan's been covering the electric, the groceries, even the internet. Every month. Without asking for a pat on the back. I paused mid-chew, unsure whether I had misheard her or misjudged the entire situation. She's really stepped up, my father added, nodding gravely, like he was announcing something noble. It's a shame you never think to do things like that. Everything's always about you. It was Thanksgiving, and I was home again. Not home in the cozy, sentimental way people talk about in holiday commercials. No, this was the kind of home where I always treaded carefully, where one wrong word could turn the room cold. I had tried, for years, to make peace with that fact. But nothing prepares you for the moment your parents look you in the eye and accuse you of being heartless, especially when you've spent the last 8 months quietly paying their bills. Across the table, Megan smiled faintly, her expression demure, but her eyes gleamed. She always knew how to play her cards, just sweet enough to look humble, just quiet enough to seem generous. Not once had she mentioned my name. She didn't need to. Letting them believe it had been her all along was enough. I set my fork down carefully and looked between them. I began, unsure of how to ease into the truth without sounding defensive. But my mother was already shaking her head, as if the very sound of my voice was unwelcome. Please don't make this into one of your guilt trips, Rachel. We're just saying we appreciate what Megan's done. We'd like to enjoy a nice dinner without the theatrics. Theatrics. The word stung more than I expected. Megan tilted her head in mock concern. It's fine, really. I didn't do it for praise. I just couldn't watch things fall apart while you were busy, doing your own thing. My mouth went dry. I had been the one shifting deadlines at work to accommodate freelance projects, skipping dinners with friends, tightening my own grocery budget so I could send an extra $100 here and there to keep their accounts from overdrafting. Not once had I attached my name to the bank transfers. I'd kept them anonymous, thinking it would spare them any sense of embarrassment. Instead, it left the door wide open for Megan to slip in and take credit. I tried again, this time a little firmer. Enough, my father cut in, setting down his wine glass with a hard thud. You always find a way to make it about you. Let your sister have this moment. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the clinking of utensils had stopped. The judgment in the air was thick, almost tangible, like smoke after a fire. No one wanted to hear me. No one cared whether I had something important to say. And Megan, sitting there in her perfectly curated sweater dress with a halo of parental admiration around her, looked like she was watching a slow-motion victory. I excused myself with as much grace as I could muster and stepped out into the biting wind. The porch light buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the lawn. I wrapped my arms around my coat and walked to the edge of the yard, staring at the skeletal trees that lined the road, their branches black and brittle against the purple dusk. I wasn't angry, not in the way they expected me to be. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was colder, more complex, a cocktail of disbelief, disappointment, and the kind of bone-deep hurt that settles in the spaces where love used to live. They believed her. Without hesitation. Without question. They didn't ask for proof. They didn't wonder how Megan, who worked part-time at a boutique and still relied on their health insurance, could afford to pay their bills every month. They just assumed I was the selfish one. And I had spent almost a year moving pieces behind the scenes to make sure they were okay. I hadn't asked for credit. I hadn't even wanted it. But now, watching them praise Megan for something she hadn't done while condemning me for things they never took the time to understand, it rewired something inside me. I realized then that my silence hadn't been interpreted as selflessness. It had been taken as absence. As indifference. And Megan had filled that gap with a lie she wore like a crown. But I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't storm back into the house demanding they believe me. Instead, I walked back inside, sat down quietly, and waited for the meal to end. I would show them the truth. Not today. Not like this. But soon. Not with rage. Not with pleading. I would show them with proof so clear it would leave no room for interpretation. And when that moment came, when the lie unraveled and the truth stood naked in the center of the room, I wouldn't need to say a word. They would know. And I would finally be seen. The days after Thanksgiving passed in a kind of emotional haze. I kept thinking of my mother's voice, so effortlessly sharp, and my father's silence, heavier than any words. I replayed Megan's carefully innocent smile, the one she always wore when she knew no one would challenge her. Over and over, I tried to decide what hurt the most, that they didn't believe me, or that it hadn't even occurred to them to ask. I kept wondering how Megan found out about the transfers. I had used a separate account, one I rarely touched for anything else, and sent the payments anonymously through my bank's family care program, a feature that allowed private contributions without disclosing the sender. It had felt like the right thing to do at the time, an act of care free from ego or expectation. Maybe I should have signed my name. Maybe I had underestimated just how little they saw me, how easy it was to forget that I had a heart just as capable of generosity as Megan's, but without the performance. One evening, a few days after returning home, I sat on my small sofa nursing a glass of red wine, staring at the muted glow of my laptop screen. A part of me still clung to the idea that someone in my family might reach out, an email from my mother, a voicemail from my father, even a text from Megan pretending to smooth things over. But there was nothing. Just silence. Not even a passive-aggressive comment on my latest Instagram post, which was saying something. They had dismissed me so thoroughly, they didn't even think it necessary to follow up. That was the moment something in me shifted. I wasn't going to confront them in the traditional sense. I wasn't going to beg for validation or throw facts at them until they gave in out of guilt. I wasn't 13 anymore. This wasn't about finally being seen through the fog of their biases. This was about reclaiming my self-respect. I would let the truth speak for itself. In full light. Without needing to shout. But if I wanted to do this, it had to be on my terms, and it had to be clean. No petty outbursts. No revenge posts. Just quiet, irrefutable facts. I opened my banking dashboard and began gathering evidence, PDFs of every transaction since March, each one labeled with the payment confirmation number, date, and the account it had been sent to. I stared at the growing list of files, the trail of digital breadcrumbs that told a story no one had bothered to ask about. There it was, months of sacrifice, each payment a small act of love disguised as routine. I remembered skipping happy hours and passing on that vacation to Lisbon with friends, thinking at the time that family came first. Now it felt like I'd been watering a garden that never grew. The next step was trickier. I needed a time and place to let the truth speak, but I didn't want to ambush them. I wanted them to hear it, absorb it, and feel it without the defense mechanisms they were so skilled at using. It had to be somewhere public enough that they couldn't simply walk away, but intimate enough that it didn't feel like a spectacle. That's when I remembered the Christmas Eve gathering. Every year, they hosted a small family get-together, just a few cousins, an aunt or two, warm drinks, and forced cheer. It was always Megan's stage to glow on, the night she dressed in glittery sweaters and offered carefully timed stories about promotions, dating, or charity work. I usually sat near the kitchen, sipping cider and waiting for the evening to end. But this year, I would attend with intention. I would bring the proof. And if the conversation drifted, as it always did, to the subject of who cared most, who gave the most, and who deserved the most praise, I'd be ready. I wasn't going to win anything. This wasn't about victory. It was about being unsilenced. A few days later, I got a group text from my mom, looking forward to seeing everyone on the 24th. Bring cookies if you're able. Megan, can you help me with the decorations again? Rachel, hope you're coming. Hope I'm coming. It was so casual, so dismissive, as if the events of Thanksgiving had never happened. Not a single mention of the conversation, the accusations, or my silent departure from the table. I stared at the message, unsure whether to laugh or cry. But I simply typed back, "I'll be there." That night, I called my friend Lila, someone who had stood beside me through college, job changes, and more than one messy family story. She listened as I laid it all out, what had happened, what I was planning, and why it felt so necessary to finally pull the curtain back. She didn't interrupt. She didn't minimize. When I was done, she said only this, "Good. Tell the truth. Let them sit with it." There was something about her certainty that calmed me. I didn't need to second-guess myself anymore. I had done nothing wrong. And I was finally done letting their assumptions become my reality. I printed the documents. All of them. Put them in a clean white folder. No dramatic red marks. No angry scribbles in the margins. Just plain, clear facts. I tucked it away in my bag and zipped it shut. It wasn't anger that settled in my chest as I prepared for that evening. It was something steadier. A sense of grounding. I wasn't trying to burn bridges. I just wasn't going to carry them alone anymore. This time, when I walked through that front door, it wouldn't be as the apologetic daughter or the second-place sister. It would be as myself, flawed, generous, and finally ready to speak the truth. Not because they deserved it. But because I did. The snow had just started falling when I pulled into my parents' driveway. The folder was in my passenger seat. A simple manila rectangle. It didn't look like much, but it contained 8 months' worth of proof, quiet sacrifices bound in transaction logs and digital receipts. 8 months of love that no one had noticed. Or rather, no one had bothered to wonder about. I didn't feel nervous. Not exactly. What I felt was something closer to readiness. Not for confrontation, but for clarity. This was no longer about getting them to believe me. It was about making sure I no longer had to live beneath a false narrative. If they still chose Megan's version of the truth after this, then I'd know, without question, that it had never been about evidence. It had always been about convenience. I stepped out of the car and into the cold, the folder tucked carefully under my coat. Each step up the walkway felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of everything left unsaid for too long. Inside, the house was already bustling. Warm music played low in the background, mingling with laughter and the sound of plates clinking in the kitchen. My mother stood by the fireplace arranging cookies on a tiered platter, perfectly composed as always, with Megan fluttering behind her in a crimson turtleneck and gold earrings, talking about the office gift exchange as if it were a tale of corporate diplomacy. When I walked in, my mother looked up with a practiced smile, like I was a coworker arriving late to a party she wasn't thrilled to host. "Oh good," she said. "You made it." Megan turned just in time to offer a surprised little wave, as though she hadn't been expecting me at all. "I almost told Mom you'd changed your mind," she said with a shrug. "Glad you could squeeze us in." I forced a smile and handed my coat to the closet, keeping the folder pressed firmly to my side. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. I stayed quiet through the first hour, moving through the rooms like someone learning the layout for the first time. My cousins asked about the city. An aunt complimented my shoes. No one mentioned Thanksgiving. Not a single word. It was as if the last conversation had been erased from memory, scrubbed clean to make room for Megan's latest anecdotes about how she'd helped her coworker with a budgeting spreadsheet and really felt like a financial therapist. I waited. The moment always came, when conversation turned toward the theme of generosity, of who gave the most, who carried the family when times were hard. And it didn't take long. My uncle, sipping cider, gestured toward Megan with an approving nod. You've always had such a big heart. Helping your parents every month without even talking about it. That's character. I felt it like a pinprick between the ribs. Megan tilted her head and laughed modestly. I just do what I can. Family's important. My mother beamed. She really has been a godsend this year. We would have been struggling without her help. No one looked at me. Not even once. I let the silence stretch. Just long enough for it to sink in. Just long enough for everyone in the room to believe that their version of events was complete. Then I stood. I'm glad you brought that up, I said calmly, walking over to the coffee table and placing the folder on top of it. Because there's something I've been meaning to clarify. My father glanced up, his brow already furrowed. My mother's smile twitched. Megan's fingers curled slightly around her wine glass. I know everyone's heard how Megan's been supporting our parents financially this year, I continued. But I think you should all see where that support actually came from. I opened the folder slowly and began to lay out the printed receipts, month after month of transfer confirmations, each one with the exact amount, the destination accounts, and the matching email confirmations from my bank. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just let the documents speak. I started sending money back in March, I said, tapping a transaction. Everything from their utilities to the groceries. It's all here. I didn't put my name on the transfers because I didn't want them to feel embarrassed. I thought that was the kind thing to do. The room was silent. The kind of silence that makes the air feel heavier. And somewhere along the way, I continued, Megan found out. And instead of clarifying the truth, she let everyone believe it was her. Megan laughed, sharp and nervous. Rachel, come on. What are you doing? I looked at her, not with anger, but with a kind of tired clarity. I'm doing what I should have done months ago. I'm telling the truth. My mother stepped forward, blinking rapidly. That can't be right. Megan, she told us she was handling everything. She told you, I said, but did you ever ask for proof? Did you ever question how she could afford all that on part-time income? My father, silent until now, finally looked down at the documents, tracing a finger over the printouts as if the numbers might rearrange themselves. This is your account, he muttered. Yes. It is. Megan opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked like she'd swallowed a stone. And for the first time in years, I felt taller. I didn't gloat. I didn't revel in the moment. But I watched the understanding dawn on each face in the room. The story they had so confidently believed had fallen apart in under 5 minutes. My mother sat down slowly. Her expression was unreadable, part disbelief, part shame. I don't understand, she said softly. Why wouldn't you just say something? I shrugged. Because I wasn't doing it for recognition. I thought maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing quietly would speak louder than asking to be seen. I was wrong. No one spoke. Even the fireplace seemed to crackle more quietly. I gathered the papers back into the folder and stood there, calm, composed, unshaken. I didn't come here to demand anything. I just wanted the truth to be known. You can do with it whatever you want. And with that, I stepped away from the table, leaving behind the tidy pile of proof and the heavy silence that followed it. Let them sit with it. Let them sit with all of it. No one moved. The folder sat untouched on the coffee table like something radioactive, plain, unimposing, yet pulsing with invisible energy. Every eye in the room had followed it there, and now they couldn't quite look at anything else. I didn't expect applause. I hadn't come for it. But the sudden shift in atmosphere was unmistakable, like a building cracking at the foundation. The version of events everyone had agreed to, the myth where Megan was the selfless savior and I, the distant, indifferent daughter, had collapsed under the weight of proof. It didn't matter how pretty her performance had been. The documents had spoken plainly. The truth, for once, had the floor. I stood quietly by the sideboard, letting the silence linger. I could have said more. I could have pushed the point further. But I didn't need to. They were already crumbling. My mother was the first to speak. Her voice had lost its certainty. "Rachel, why didn't you say anything sooner? If you were helping us all this time." She trailed off, as if the question had answered itself. I looked at her, not with anger, but with tired eyes that had waited too long to be seen. "Because I thought if you knew, it would change the way you looked at me. Not because you'd be grateful, but because you'd feel guilty. And I didn't want our relationship to be built on guilt." Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked older than I remembered. She folded her hands in her lap and stared down at the coffee table as if it had something more to tell her. Across the room, Megan hadn't moved. She still stood near the fireplace, wine glass in hand, her mouth slightly parted. The flush on her cheeks was fading into something paler, more unstable. "I didn't lie," she said suddenly, louder than necessary. "I never said I sent the money." "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "But you didn't correct them either." "Not once." Megan opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Instead, she turned to our mother, her expression flickering with desperation. "I just thought it would make things easier. You were always worried about bills. You said you didn't want to be a burden. I was trying to help." My father finally spoke, his voice dry and slow. "By taking credit for something you didn't do." There was no venom in his tone, just the disbelief of a man watching his carefully held assumptions disintegrate. Megan set her glass down a little too hard, the sound startling in the quiet. "Why does it matter who did it? The money came either way. It's not like anyone got hurt." I took a small step forward, my voice still calm, but no longer soft. "It matters because it changed how you treated me. You used it to shape the story. You let them believe I was selfish, careless, too absorbed in my life to care about anyone else. And they believed you." I turned to my father now. "You looked at me like a disappointment. You dismissed everything I said. At Thanksgiving, you told me I should apologize or leave. And I did. I walked out of here thinking I might actually be the terrible daughter you always seemed to think I was." His face shifted, his mouth opening slightly as if to interject, but no words followed. "I needed to remind myself that I'm not," I added quietly. "And tonight wasn't about proving that to you. It was about proving it to myself." I let the words hang, then stepped away from the group entirely. I moved toward the hallway, the one that led to the front door, unsure whether I would stay another minute or leave for good. But just as I reached the end of the room, I heard a voice behind me, unexpected, raw. "Rachel." I turned. It was my father. He was standing now, one hand resting on the back of the couch for balance, his face pale, eyes hollow in a way I hadn't seen before. I didn't know. I should have asked more. Thought more. I just assumed. There was nothing performative in his voice. No self-defense. No backpedaling. Just the slow unraveling of certainty, thread by thread. My mother stood beside him, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked at me, and then at Megan, and for once, didn't rush to smooth things over. "I don't know how we let it get this far," she whispered. "But we did." She looked at Megan again, who now seemed small in a way I'd never seen, her chin tilted downward, shoulders folding in. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Everyone could see it now. The golden child had tarnished herself, not with one terrible act, but with 1,000 quiet omissions. And I, the invisible one, had finally pulled the veil away. My father looked at me again. "Thank you. For what you did. And I'm sorry for what we didn't. I didn't nod. I didn't reach for him. I just let the moment sit. You believed what was easy, I said softly. And now you have to live with that. He nodded once, like he'd been told something he couldn't unhear. The room remained still. My cousins were silent. The hum of music continued faintly in the background, still playing something festive that now felt almost cruel. I felt no triumph. No thrill. But I did feel peace. Not because they apologized. Not because the truth had finally landed. But because I had spoken. On my terms. In my voice. And they had finally listened. Just then, Megan turned and walked out of the room, disappearing down the hallway, her footsteps soft on the carpet. No one followed. My mother looked after her, then turned back to me with tears brimming in her eyes. If you ever feel like coming back again, really coming back, we'll be here. I know, I said. And this time, I meant it with no bitterness, no resignation. Just clarity. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. They could spend the rest of the evening with the truth laid bare on the table between the cider and the sugar cookies, and it would be up to them to decide what to do with it. As for me, I was already whole. And I was already free. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table in an old sweatshirt, bare feet curled beneath me, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. There was a serenity in finally being heard, not loudly, not violently, but truthfully. I hadn't begged for understanding or pleaded for their affection. I had simply opened the door and invited them to see what had always been there. Whether or not they walked through it was up to them. Later that day, a message came through from my father. Not a call, just a simple text. We read everything again this morning. We're sorry. Truly. Let us know when you're ready to talk. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type anything right away. I wasn't ready to decide how I felt about that message. Apologies, I'd learned, are not endings. They are invitations. And I wasn't sure I wanted to RSVP just yet. Another message came in a few minutes later, this one from Megan. I messed up. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't think you'd ever want to be the one in the spotlight. I didn't think you'd care. I read it 3 times. The first time with anger, the second with disbelief, the third with something softer. Not forgiveness. But understanding. That was the truth of it, she had mistaken my silence for absence, my humility for apathy. She didn't think I'd care because, for most of our lives, I'd trained myself not to compete with her. I had survived by making myself small enough not to threaten her glow. But I wasn't small anymore. I typed a reply. I didn't care about the spotlight. I cared about the lie. She didn't respond. Not then. And maybe that was for the best. A few weeks later, I received a card in the mail. A handwritten note from my mother. Rachel. You were right. We believed what was easiest. We didn't ask questions because we didn't want complicated answers. We saw Megan as the helper because it suited the roles we had all settled into. And we stopped seeing you. I don't know how to apologize for that without it sounding small. But I want to try. You did more than pay bills. You showed us what love without conditions looks like. And we mistook your quiet for distance, when it was actually grace. I'm sorry for the things I said. For the times I silenced you. For not asking how you were doing when you were holding us up. If you're ever ready to come home, not for the holidays, not for obligation, but just to be, you'll be met with something different. I promise. With love, Mom. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and tucked it away in the drawer where I kept old letters, photographs, and fragments of other lives I'd lived. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was clean. Like something had finally been washed out of me. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I needed to win anyone over. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I had crossed a threshold. I still sent money occasionally. But now I attached my name to it. No more hiding. If they were uncomfortable, they'd have to sit with it. If they appreciated it, they could say so. And if they said nothing, that would be an answer too. Months passed. Spring bloomed slowly across the city, and with it, a gentler rhythm. I saw Megan once, briefly, at a cousin's birthday party. She didn't say much, and neither did I. But we exchanged a glance that felt like a truce. Not peace, not closeness. Just the quiet acknowledgement that something old had ended, and something honest had taken its place. And my parents? They began checking in. Not often. But with sincerity. Not performative. Just, real. Looking back, it's strange how such a small lie, someone quietly taking credit, can spiral into something so deep and painful. But what hurt most wasn't the lie itself. It was the way it echoed through years of being overlooked, misread, and underestimated. It was the way it confirmed the quiet truth I'd always feared, that in my family, care had to be loud to be seen. If you've ever been the one in the shadows, the one who loved quietly, who gave without being asked, who disappeared so others could shine, let this be your reminder.